Hey everyone, and welcome to the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes Iceberg Explained. Now, I'm sure most of you know how these Iceberg videos work, but in case anyone's unfamiliar, essentially I'll be going through various levels of increasingly obscure details, trivia, and theories relating to the show Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I'm not sure why these videos claim to be explaining icebergs, because it's not like these icebergs existed already and people didn't understand them. It's more like I'm proposing an iceberg instead of explaining one. But hey, I didn't invent this format. Now, I know what you're thinking. Pillar of garbage, what are you doing? You don't typically do stuff like this. Your content is mostly video essays, trying to make original readings of pop culture, focusing on narrative, character, history, cultural theory, and politics. And to this I'd say, why yes, hypothetical self-insert audience member, I agree. But there's two reasons I'm making this video. First, the hashtag Savetheyostverse movement, which I've promoted before, is planning another trend event in a couple of days, so I thought a video like this might be a fun way to raise awareness for that cause. More information on this later in the video, but in a nutshell, this movement is doing its best to get this show brought back for a third season. And second, one of my goals with this channel is to try and bridge the gap between channels which cover like comics, cartoons, Star Wars, sitcoms, that sort of stuff, and the more serious highbrow video essayist side of YouTube. I think popular forms of entertainment such as these, and their potential impact on shaping people's opinions and ideologies are too often overlooked. So I'm consciously trying not to pigeonhole my content too much. So when the Reckless Justice Avenger, a pretty frequent viewer of mine, suggested an iceberg video, I thought, hey, why not? So now, without further ado, let's get into the iceberg. Let's start with the topmost level, the surface. Changing Nick Fury. Between his appearances in Season 1 and 2, Nick Fury's outfit and hairstyle changed dramatically, becoming a lot more similar visually to Sam Jackson's MCU Fury, as well as the Sam Jackson-inspired Ultimate Universe Fury. The interesting thing though is that this Fury is also very similar to the Fury we'd see in Ultimate Spider-Man and Avengers Assemble, shows which came out just after Earth's Mightiest Heroes and constituted the next Marvel shared animated universe. Given that Earth's Mightiest Heroes Season 2 was delayed in order to air nearer to Ultimate Spider-Man, you've got to wonder, does this redesign suggest that once upon a time, the powers that be at Marvel Animation were considering folding Earth's Mightiest Heroes into this new universe? Sadly, the show was cancelled to make room for Avengers Assemble instead, but it's still interesting to think about. Missing episodes. There's a few episodes of the show that went missing in one way or another. The most infamous example is the episode Powerless, which didn't initially air in the US. Most of the rest of us still got it, and the Yankees eventually got it as well when reruns kicked in, but this omission is still visible in the way Disney Plus lists Powerless out of order as the last episode of Season 2, when it should have been episode 15. What's more, a couple of episodes were left off the show's official DVD releases. Disney's original domestic DVD release misses off Along Came a Spider, and UK DVDs of the show miss the Captain America introductory episode. Tie-in comics. I actually only learnt about this myself fairly recently, but there's a whole bunch of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes tie-in comics, which are apparently set in the same continuity as the show. And while some merely retell stories from the cartoon, there's a good deal of original material here too, often focusing on members of the team joining forces to catch some of the other villains who scarpered during Season 1's breakout. There's the occasional continuity error in them, but as we'll see later on, that can also be said for the show itself, so yeah, check them out maybe. Original Wasp look. While it's become pretty iconic in the decade or so since the show first aired, Janet Van Dyne's Wasp costume in Earth's Mightiest Heroes is the only outfit in the show which was created entirely from scratch. And there's a slight irony here, because largely due to being a fashion designer, comic book Wasp went through costumes like Leonardo DiCaprio goes through weirdly young girlfriends. To clarify, that's a lot. But back to Wasp, the Earth's Mightiest Heroes look seems to be a combination of her red and black costume and her yellower one. But regardless of visual precedence, it's impressive that such a short-lived series managed to give Wasp one of her most iconic looks yet. Combined Zemos. One fun way Earth's Mightiest Heroes managed to compress decades and decades of Avengers history into 2 seasons was through the occasional merging of similar characters. We can see this clearly in Baron Zemo. In the original comics, there were two of these nasty German fellas, Heinrich Zemo and his son Helmut Zemo. Heinrich was mainly significant during Cap's wartime stories, and Helmut tended to be the one making waves in the present day. Earth's Mightiest Heroes fuses the two together into just the one character, a decision I think works quite well because it gives Cap and Zemo more emotional and thematic tension, something I talked a little more about in a previous video which I'll link now. The show references this character fusion though. In the episode Living Legend, we see a flashback of Cap getting sticky gunk all over Zemo's face, and as a result, Zemo's mask shrinks from the baggy Heinrich look to comic book Helmut's tighter fit. An interesting addendum to this is that Earth's Mightiest Heroes actually did the opposite with Nick Fury. 616 Fury led the Howling Commandos himself, but here, it's Nick's father Jack that fought in the war. That's it for the surface, so let's move down to level 2, the shallow waters. Hulky origins. Many would call Avengers EMH the best version of the team we've ever had on screen, but that wasn't always the plan, because the project which would eventually become Earth's Mightiest Heroes began as a Hulk series, before the direction of development shifted into a team-based dynamic. These hulky origins are one of the reasons we see so many Gamma villains in the show, in episodes such as the Gamma World 2-parter. Funeral Vision. One of the most infamous continuity errors in the show is Vision's presence at Hank's funeral in the episode Yellow Jacket. This should be impossible, because the episode before saw a damaged Vision taken offline for repairs. We see him wake when these repairs are finished in the episode Emperor Stark, but this comes after Yellow Jacket. A little harmless mistake? Or does it make the entire show literally unwatchable? Your call. Season 3 plans. In 2020, Christopher Yost, the show's story editor and co-creator, revealed the tentative plans for episode plots, character appearances, and the general vibe which had been developed for the show should it have run for another season. In a nutshell, Season 3 was going to be the Magic and Mutants season, with the team crossing over with characters such as Doctor Strange and the X-Men. But don't just take my word for it, take Yost's, because I'll throw a link in the description to all the information he revealed. There's a whole bunch of episode synopses, as well as a partial script for the season's opener. It all sounds fascinating, makes you wish there was a way we could see some of these ideas on screen. Oh, and would you look at that, next we're talking about #SaveTheYostverse. This refers to the rallying cry of the fan campaign I'm trying to raise awareness of with this video, with the Yostverse being a series of semi-linked shows including EMH, Wolverine and the X-Men, and sometimes Spectacular Spider-Man too. Recent years have seen more than a few shows and projects released to the public or revived after many years, and this section of the EMH community is hoping that the show can become one of them. Now, I've got a video dedicated to this movement specifically, and that should be linked on screen now. It also goes a little more in depth on those Season 3 plans, but suffice it to say that this goal isn't as unrealistic as it might seem, especially given the recent confirmation that Marvel is reviving the 90s X-Men show after like 2 decades. So if you want to help bring this show back, all you have to do is go on Twitter at 3 PM UTC on the 23rd of January and tweet with #SaveTheYostverse. Share a thought, a picture, a link, anything, and put that tag on it. See you then. Yostverse connections. We're sticking with the theme of the Yostverse for now, because I'm gonna run through a few of the points within Earth's Mightiest Heroes run where we see connections to these other Yostverse properties. The most obvious is the brief reference in Season 1 to the Mutant Response Division, the antagonists from Wolverine and the X-Men. There's also the shared voice actors such as Steve Blum for Wolverine, or Alex Desert as Nick Fury, and the fact that Fury's wall of paranoia in Season 2 shows X-Men with a more or less similar design to how they appear in Wolverine and the X-Men. Back to shared voice actors though, perhaps the most controversial connection was that Josh Keaton, voice actor for Peter Parker in Spectacular Spider-Man, was originally going to reprise the role in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. However, following studio pressure, he was replaced at the 11th hour by Drake Bell, who would go on to play the character in Ultimate Spider-Man. But it was always the intention of the EMH team for this Peter to sound like Keaton, and Yost has indicated on Twitter that the Spidey we see in Earth's Mightiest Heroes was intended to be the same one we'd seen earlier in Spectacular Spider-Man. This is another topic I've talked about before though, so click the link on screen now if you want to hear more about the Yostverse. Keaton tape. Going back to the scrapped Keaton dub for a second, it's rumoured that somewhere in the world, a version of the episode was transmitted at least once in English with the original non-Bell Spidey voice. This fabled copy of Along Came a Spider became the target of unsuccessful fan efforts a few years back, which tried to get Disney to release the Keaton cut. Sadly, I can't find any convincing evidence that this version of the episode ever actually aired. Showrunner change. Halfway through the show's second season, the powers that be at Marvel Animation decided that a change was needed, and they brought in the famed Man of Action writing team of Ben 10 fame to take over the rest of the show. This decision has puzzled fans, since it appears that at the time of the change, the decision had already been made to stop EMH after the end of Season 2, but in recent years the effects of this change have become clearer. Yost tweeted some details back in 2020, and among other things, it seems the Galactus and New Avengers stories were originally significantly different to how they played out under Man of Action. Ultimately, I'm still happy with the Season 2 we ended up with, and while Yost's original plans do sound pretty baller, how big a deal this showrunner change is comes down to personal opinion. MCU influence. While many details of EMH's world are pretty faithful adaptations of their pre-MCU comic equivalents, given that the show aired after Iron Man and that Hulk film nobody talks about, some elements of the MCU had already snuck into the cartoon setting. Examples include a very Edward Norton-esque Bruce Banner, Jarvis being a computer dude instead of an old dude, and the plot of the episode Powerless echoing the Thor film which had released a year prior. Now we're moving down to the next level, the Finding Nemo level, like the bit of the sea where all those anemones and clownfish and shit live. You've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. Famous Falcon. While most of the voice cast were experienced actors and voice actors, a couple of the names on the call sheet were a little bigger than others. One example of this is Falcon. Appearing briefly in Season 2, this flying fella was actually played by famous movie star Lance Reddick. Season 4/5 plans. A couple of months ago, Yost revealed in brief some general ideas for directions the show could have gone in hypothetical 4th and 5th seasons. Essentially, Season 4 would have seen EMH adapt the storylines Under Siege and Infinity Quest, taking the team to new locales both on Earth and across the universe. The details we have on Season 5's potential direction are even fewer, but Yost hinted towards some sort of Secret Wars adaptation being on the cards. This topic is another one I've done a full video on though, so click in the corner now to see that. Unused concept art. A few years back, ex-EMH character designer Thomas Perkins shared some very intriguing, unused pieces of concept art. I'll throw some of them on screen now, but we see a whole bunch of shocking and surprising situations, like an alternate Fantastic Four made of Avengers members, X-Men in the Earth's Mightiest Heroes style, or Wasp as Captain Universe. There's even 3D Man of all people, and a few other fun ideas. Now, these weren't ever actually firm plans for episodes. Perkins describes them as what-ifs, but regardless, they've become fun curios embraced by the community. Yost in Thor. While we shouldn't ever reduce the success of Earth's Mightiest Heroes down to a single person, after all, the show required many brilliant minds working in tandem, from writers and artists to directors and producers, not least superstar developer and producer Joshua Fine. The name which many fans associate most with the show's success is the aforementioned Christopher Yost, but it might surprise you to learn that even after Man of Action were brought in to replace Yost in Season 2, the writer remained an active part of many Marvel properties you might have seen or read. Most notably, for the film-watching public, he was part of the writing staff for Thor: The Dark World and Thor: Ragnarok. Maybe that's why we got some Surtur action in the latter film. Maybe Yost was still feeling bad about leaving us with that Season 3 cliffhanger. Skrull Doom. I recently made a video discussing Doctor Doom's role in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and I discussed the scene where he shows up and gives Iron Man the Skrull detector thingy. My take on that scene was that Doom was telling the truth, and that this act of altruism was just so that he could outsource dealing with the Skrulls to the Avengers and get back to doing evil mastermind stuff. However, a couple of people in the comments had a different take. They thought that this Doom was a Skrull and was responsible for uploading the virus into Iron Man's armor, which disables it at the episode's end. Now, I don't buy this. I think that since Doom was aware of the Skrulls before even the Avengers, he'd be the last person they'd be able to replace. And I think Doom's motivation for aiding Tony is perfectly in character. But I suppose there is a little bit of ambiguity here, so I'd be interested to hear, down below, just how many of you think this one's true. Fury's moving eye patch. I only noticed this fairly recently when someone posted a comparative image to my Discord, linked to that in the description by the way, but between his appearances in Wolverine and the X-Men and Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Fury's eye patch changes eyes. Remember, this is supposed to be the same Fury, so what's going on here? LMD? Maybe he's not blind at all, and it's all a ruse. Or maybe it's an innocent continuity error, up to you. And now we're down to the final level of the iceberg, the deep. Avengers Assemble, originally a sequel. I can't find many sources on this one, so maybe take it with a grain of salt, but apparently Avengers Assemble was originally going to be a bona fide follow-up to Earth's Mightiest Heroes, continuing the world and the characters, albeit with a greater focus on introducing young viewers to the wider world of Marvel. After the success of the Avengers film, however, this project was scrapped mid-development and replaced by the series we'd eventually get. With this in mind though, Jeff Loeb's infamous promotional quote about Avengers Assemble makes a little bit more sense. Loeb stated ahead of the show's release that, "We're not in any way saying Earth's Mightiest Heroes never happened. You will see an epic conclusion, and then you'll say, oh, what's next?" Now, with the version of Assemble we ended up getting, this is obviously not the case. But yeah, all the references on wiki pages to this nugget of information have expired, so it's hard to know just how accurate this one is. Mockingbird on the team. Some rumours suggest that Mockingbird was originally planned to join the Avengers roster. This makes a lot of sense. After all, she was a classic comic book member of the team, albeit one that joined a little while after the book got going. She's similar in this respect to Ms. Marvel and Vision, both of whom ended up getting on the team in the show. Plus, she was set up in the Hulk vs. the World micro episode, so the groundwork was there from the start. Unfortunately though, these plans fell through because, not unlike Falcon, Mockingbird was played by a pretty successful actor, E.G. Daily, and there wasn't room in the budget for her to become a regular. But the show ended up making good use of the character anyway, turning her into a linchpin for the Secret Invasion storyline in Season 2, so maybe all's well that ends well. Claw's Predators. This one's a bit of a deep cut, but I thought it would be fun to include. When Ulysses Klaue shows up in The Man in the Anthill, he brings a team of mercenaries with him to try and shake down Hank Pym. And these guys look a little familiar, especially if you've seen the 1987 film Predator. That's right, Klaue's mercenaries seem to be an animated version of Dutch and his crew. Or, you know, maybe it's a coincidence, but hey, maybe it's not. But I've saved my favourite for last. Wasp was a mutant. The show never really explicitly explained the power set of the Wasp. In her and Hank's introductory episode, there's some light suggestions that her and Hank got their powers around the same time, so many people reasonably assume that her origins are similar to her original comic book story. Namely, Hank gave her the power to shrink, grow wings, and shoot little stinger blast thingies. But this never made a whole deal of sense. Why wouldn't he give himself wings, or energy blasts? Seemingly, the Ultimate Comics also thought this was odd, and in that continuity, Wasp was actually a mutant. And when the show was originally airing, some viewers wondered if this might be the case in EMH too. What's more, in the world of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, or at least the tie-in comics, even Magneto thinks Wasp was a mutant. She eventually denies this, but the explanation she gives for her powers is pretty vague. If this was true, it would add a whole new layer of significance to her rivalry with Whirlwind. And again, I can't show you this because it's seemingly been wiped from the internet, but apparently Wasp's character profile on the Disney XD website used to suggest that while people assume she got her powers from Hank, that wasn't necessarily the truth. But looking at the tie-in comics, it seems this probably isn't the case, but I think there's enough ambiguity here for this crackpot theory to live on. And that's that, the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes Iceberg. I guess it could have been a little bigger maybe, but I think I covered all the biggest bits of trivia and theories. And I'm doing my best to get this out in time to promote the hashtag Savetheyostverse trend event. Also, everything's a little behind schedule currently for medical reasons, so I hope you didn't mind the at times more basic editing for this video. And again, to support the movement to restore the Yostverse, all you need to do is tweet this Sunday, the 23rd of January at 3 PM UTC using the hashtag. So to maximize the amount of people who hear about this, and to thereby maximize the chances of getting the tag trending, I'm gonna be cheeky and ask for a like on the video. It gives the algorithm a boost. But I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes Iceberg, and if you know about any more bits and bobs that I didn't mention, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. But thanks for watching, and as always, I want to thank my patrons on screen now, especially Ian Fifield.